Hello, everyone. This is FIDE Master Viktor Nustroyev, and thank you for joining our webinar today. We are going to talk about how to play against d4, how to make it, how to play maybe more aggressively, how to prevent the plans that white typically wants to initiate when they choose the queen pawn setups like Queen's Gambit, like Catalan, Trompowsky variation, and London system. These are the most logical and most common moves. I mean, common plans that white initiate when they decide to play d4. Okay, so we have 7 attendees at the moment. People are joining. Please, guys, let me know whether the quality is good and you can see the screen, you can see my face, and everything works perfectly well. Okay, I'm going to, well, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, thank you, John. If you want, you can unmute yourself. So your camera is not allowed, but if you guys want to allow me you to use your camera, probably I can do it. So for example, if John wants, then we can definitely do it. Who else wants? Because last time I prohibited to use cameras because of security reasons. Also, this time we start 1 hour earlier for those who didn't shift to the daylight time yesterday. I mean, not yesterday, but tonight. Tonight means this evening. No, okay. The night.
This morning.
Yeah, this morning. Thank you. So the night from Saturday to Sunday. Yeah, so that's why. Well, actually, we start earlier even for me because here in Argentina we do not shift time at all, and shifting time is a bit confusing me. So actually, guys, so I see there are some people who are my students who I work individually with. So let's you please message me back to adjust our lessons for the upcoming week, because I might have some issues because well my British students didn't shift to the other time, but Americans did, so we have some troubles. So yeah, okay, so Jean-Pierre asks if we can register. What do you want to register for? Yeah, Brian, thank you for being flexible. I'll message you after the class and we will maybe shift our lesson for 30 minutes later, maybe. So Jean-Pierre, can you please clarify what you can register? What would you like to register for? The video or PGN? So do you want to get the recording of this event? Okay, perfect. Yes, you can. You should please message me back at tricksofchess@gmail.com, and then I'll send you the link where you can download this video. Not sure about PGNs because I'm using PGNs taken from ChessBase and some of them are annotated. That's why, well, I do not use this annotation, but if I send it to someone, it can be a problem with a copyright issue. So at least you can get the video, and you can also get the PGN of the games that are not annotated. Well, actually here, well, I took the first game from ChessBase. It is annotated, but it is annotated on German language, which I don't understand at all. Completely. Okay, let's find. So, I mean, let's continue, of course, with our task. So today we are going to talk about how to defeat players who play d4 and how to play aggressively with black pieces. So maybe you guys were expecting me to demonstrate something like Budapest Gambit uh, or maybe England Gambit with like let me show you, like d45, or maybe maybe here d4, d5, c4, e5, like that. No, this is not what we are going to do, because I don't think that these openings are, well, these sacrifices are sound. They are actually not. And if you are playing against someone at least rated 1800, he'll definitely find a way of how to punish you for playing such openings. So I'm not the fan of such gambits where you may lose. So I can play the gambit if I think that at the very worst scenario, the position becomes equal. For example, I play Evans Gambit because of that. Black can equalize if they know a lot of theory, but if they don't, they are in trouble. King's Indian defense. King's Indian defense is a very good weapon against d4. But no, we are not going to talk about King's Indian today. However, some of my students really enjoy playing this opening. So, for example, Brian plays it regularly, and I can say that his results with black pieces improved. So, Brian, you can just, well, if you want, you can support what I said, or maybe you think that your opening repertoire with King's Indian wasn't improved, and instead you'd better think that you should play something else. Okay, it's up to you. But
Yeah.
I actually,
I'd say that it provides for great attacking chances, and it's very flexible.
yeah,
So I like it for that,
that's
especially
right.
against the
So
London.
yes, so what I wanted to say that you can use King's Indian against any opening except when white plays e4. So King's Indian can be played against d4, c4, b4, knight f3. In all these openings, King's Indian looks good, and you have plans. What I don't like about King's Indian is that you have to play some positions which are not natural. So which are not, well, how to explain that? Okay, I just gonna show you. So let's say c4, d6, knight c, wow, what I'm doing. Okay, d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, so we prevent e5, knight f3, castle, and in this position, there are a lot of moves white has, so this is the most common one, after which we play e5 and, well, let's say castle, then knight here or knight there. So what I don't like is that what if they do not push? What if they exchange? I don't like the exchange variation. I am also not a fan of this type of the position, like that. So the knight goes here, the rook goes there, something like that. So I'm not a fan of playing this position. I would love to play King's Indian if my task is to initiate the attack on the king side in a close position. Also, so for players who play d4, for my students who play d4, yeah, anyone wants to share anything? Manish? No? Okay, if no, then I mute you. So for those of my players, of my students who play d4 as white, I usually recommend playing so-called Samish variation. Castle, bishop e3, and then instead of the black's attack on the king side, white gets an attack. So let's say e5, for example, then knight e2, or well, then queen d2, g4, castle queen side, and it becomes quite risky for black. Of course, if black knows how exactly to play, they can play to draw the game. For example, c5 is one of the common moves in this position. Well, you may think that this is a pawn blunder, well, but it's not. D takes c5, queen d8, rook d8. So at club players level, I think not everyone decides to sacrifice the pawn, but here black has a compensation. They have a powerful bishop and they quickly develop their pieces. Okay, so that's why I don't think that people that you're gonna face with will play c5. So that's why Samish is a good strategy against King's Indian. But at club players level, almost nobody plays it. What we are going to talk about is knight f6 as the most common move against d4. So c4, in this game that was played between Timur Rajabov and Michael Adams, it was this. And here, White decides to play the Catalan system with g3. So what is the best strategy against Catalan? Well, there are a lot, but most of them assume that while the bishop goes away, it makes sense to capture the pawn on c4. It opens the bishop, but at the same time provides White with a lot of difficulties because they have to gain the pawn back. This is what I mean. Okay, so let me just do some security adjustments. Yeah, I think, guys, you can see my face, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just some security adjustments. Okay, fine. So this is the point. Every time the bishop goes to g2, d takes c4, and they experience troubles winning the pawn back. They have some long-term pressure on this diagonal, but it's I cannot say easy, but it's possible to parry this pressure and to defend the position properly. So, for example, here Michael Adams played d takes c4 right away. Of course, they can win with this. They can win the pawn back with this. But what's the point of such a strategy? To move the queen twice to be able to gain a pawn, but then they can just play a6, b5, fianchetto, then undermine the center with c5. I don't think that moving the queen twice is a good idea. So that's why Timur Rajabov follows the original strategy with bishop g2, a6. Now a6 means that, well, b5 can be played sooner or later, especially if the queen tries to capture it, then b5 works really well. What can they do? Well, I thought that probably this is the best option, knight e5, because the knight attacks the pawn. It also makes such a move like b5 not possible because of this pressure through the main diagonal. But actually, knight e5 doesn't work neither. What would you suggest for black in this position? Yeah, c5 is quite interesting. What else?
C6.
C6 with the idea of doing b5 or with the idea of doing what?
Next move, then b5.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, c6 is a possible suggestion, but I don't think that you can play c6 right away. At least I don't see the point of doing it. So let's say they do a4. Because if in this position they play a4, you can successfully develop your knight on c6 and then use b4 as a good well, it's not an outpost, just a strong point for your knight where the knight cannot be chased away. The other knight can go to d5. But when you play c6, let's say here, knight c6, a4 works. Okay, so here you can play better. You can play this move. What happens then? So if they play this move, you have knight d5. adding pressure, and after this move, just knight b6, protecting the pawn. Now it's a bit difficult to gain the pawn back. And this knight goes here in order to be exchanged for this knight on e5. And then, yes, you can play c6 or what you want. If instead bishop d2, which is logical too, then it's actually a gambit. And if black wants to play for a win, it makes sense for them to capture on d4. Bishop takes b4. Black cannot castle, but, well, they get a pawn for that. And this is where they definitely have a compensation. So, I mean, white has a bishop pair, black has 2 extra pawns. If they win this, maybe they are better. But if not, then the black's position looks really good. So according to the statistics, there are a lot of games won by black. So it's quite playable. For example, there was a nice game between Gatakamsky against Wang Hao in 2012. So knight e5 bishop b4 works. So that's why they decided to castle first, but castling already allows us to play knight c6. Well, I always tell my students to not bring the knight to c6 ahead of the c7 pawn, because they may use the c pawn to fight for the center in the positions where white starts with d4 or just has the pawn on d4. But this time it does make sense, because here, so first of all, knight e5 is coming. Second, black is lagging in development, and their task is to try to develop their pieces as quickly as possible. So e3, bishop d7, knight c3, and knight d5. With this move, black wants to connect the pawns, and then c4 won't be a weakness anymore. But knight d2. However, here black had in mind the idea of playing knight b6. Can you guys please mute your microphones because of the background noise? Okay, so knight b6, now c4 cannot be gained back, and at least not easily. Of course, we could capture on c3. This move is possible too. Then b takes c3 and b5, so it's quite playable. But, well, this knight is pinned, and they have some counterplay with queen g4 move, like it happened in one of the games, like this, a4. No, this is just one of the examples of what happened. So I actually don't like this position myself for black. Well, it's extra pawn, and I would play it for black. But, well, why do I need this exchange if I can just play knight b6 and make it completely difficult for them to capture this pawn on c4? So queen e2, they attack this pawn, but you can do it knight a5. And this knight cannot be attacked because you can always capture en passant in case of b4. So what white should do? The only other way that they could try is to use the center control, because d takes c4 was played. But don't forget that they are a pawn down. So black needs to develop their pieces. What else do they need? What do you think? Castle. Well, yeah, they do need to castle, and it also makes sense to play bishop b4 to liquidate this knight at some point. So, for example, in case if a3 is played, well, we can actually retreat and then use the b3 square. But in some positions, it makes sense to liquidate this knight. And then the pawn on c4 plays a very important role. It controls these two squares. But okay, so if you are not forced to take the knight, there is no need to do it. Queen g4. Attacking here. Well, castling was definitely possible, but I think that after castling, it's e5 and knight e4 and knight f6, so something like that. So that's why here black plays queen f6. Okay, there was a good suggestion from Brian to castle queen side, but how do you castle queen side here? Because here you have to move the queen, and if you make a move here, then you become the object of the attack after e5. Then he can enter with his knights there, and you may experience some difficulties. So it's so the task for black is to speed up their development, and to castle to the king side and finish their development, they just need two moves: move the bishop and then actually castle. If you want to castle queen side, you have to move your queen, not fall under a tempi, then castle queen side, then also develop your dark squared bishop. So it's a bit more difficult task. That's why castle king side was possible, but black decides to play queen e5. And the idea of this move is to use the enemy queen as the object of the attack and maybe even exchange. They also attack on d4 at the moment. So if e5, then we offer an exchange and there is no knight e4, knight f6. It doesn't make any sense. Also, it doesn't make much sense to castle when the queens are off the board. Knight f3 was played. And this is where black starts their counterplay. So knight f3 was played in order to defend on d4. And how would you play for black? So guys, those of you who watch this webinar on YouTube can join our meeting in Zoom next time if you register at our website, chesslands.com. I'm going to put the link into the chat on YouTube. So here, this is the link. Okay, so John suggests e5 with the discovered attack on the queen. Well. So e5, what if they take with the pawn? Then you take here, they take there. This is how they ruin your pawn structure. Yeah, e5 is interesting. Let's analyze it. This, well, I don't think moving the queen is a good idea. So let's say take bishop g4. E takes f6, g takes f6. So what can we say about this position? Well, black is still a pawn up, but their pawn structure is ruined here. Well, it's definitely playable. What does the engine say? The engine says it's better for black, but just very slightly better. Yeah, okay. So h5, like Giorgio suggests us, yes, this move looks good. Now what? Well, moving the queen here or here doesn't make much sense. So they play queen f4. And now when the queens are exchanged, at least the bishop goes to a better position. And now we apply the main idea, or I mean, not the main idea, but the idea that Brian suggested. We castle queen side. This is how we cover the weakness. So they cannot attack on the C file because they just don't have enough material. And if A3 this time, then we take, and then we go to B3. This is how we use the outpost here. So then rook a2, for example, knight a4, and they experience difficulties defending the pawn on c3. So they have to play this move. Then we can activate the bishop, for example. Or do something else. Maybe f6 first to control these squares and then activate the bishop. So rook ac1 was played, f6 to control these two, h4, king b8, prophylaxis, rook c2, rook h e8. Rook e1, so the white pieces are centralized, but this is where they don't have a compensation. There is no dynamic. The pawn on c4 cannot be won right away. So there is nothing to attack on this diagonal. We can also say that the black pieces are a bit awkward because they have to locate their knight on the edge of the board, but it's not a tragedy because we can hold the pawn on c4. Okay, knight c6, knight goes back. There is only one knight required to control the pawn, rook d2, and this is where I ask you to come up with a plan which could, in your opinion, to allow black to play for a win.
Rook g8. You can push the g pawn. Looks promising.
Rook g8, but it's still not enough defenders to play g5.
Okay. We can prepare it with f5. No, that doesn't help. I'm not sure.
Craig suggests e4. Do you mean e5? Yeah, probably it's e5. E5 looks interesting. So, well, okay, let's talk about rook g8. Rook g8, g5, yes, but even, well, first of all, it's impossible to play it. You need to bring the bishop back to support g5 one more time. But even if you do all this stuff, what it allows you to do? It allows you to play g4 and chase this knight away. I think it's so many tempi to spend for just this simple thing, because without queens on the board, initiating a pawn march in order to expose the king doesn't make much sense. So e5 may make sense, but what I don't like about this is that it allows them to go with the bishop here and try to attack the rook. Also, the knight can go there. So having the pawn on f6 now allows us to not provide our opponent these two squares in order to maneuver with their knight or bishop. That's why here, well, it's a close position, right? So that's why we can initiate slow plans, and that's why black decides to play knight a7 with the idea of knight b5. Rook d2, e2 to try and to unpin, and knight b5 finally. Bishop d2, and in this position, so they are about to unpin with knight b5 move. It makes sense for us to take. We can take with the bishop. So if they take with the bishop, we exchange. That's why they took with the pawn. And after knight a4, we make this pawn the object of the attack. So in Catalan, this dark squared bishop isn't so strong. That's why very often white wants to exchange it. Here with knight a4, we force them to defend. They play this move. How to play now? Knight a3, you want to fork on c2, but they can play just rook c1 maybe. Yeah, rook c1. Yeah, knight a3, rook c1, but how to continue after that? Yes, there is no active play for white, but how does black initiate a winning plan? Knight b2 suggestion by Brian. Well, d3 is a very nice spot, but what I don't like is that they can just bring the bishop back. So here the bishop becomes kind of a useless piece. So maybe it makes sense for them to play this move and try to pressure c4, as well as control the d3 square. Bishop c6, activating the bishop first. Yeah, I think that generally speaking, this move is good. But again, this move stops the pawn. So you have a pawn majority here, and if you can somehow make this pawn a passed pawn and advance it to c3, your position becomes much better, and it will force enemy pieces to tie down to this pawn, because otherwise you just promote it. So c5 in order to open the file and make this pawn as a passed pawn. So if they take, just the knight takes. The game continued with e5 here. Bishop c6, made a lot of sense. I don't know why Michael Adams didn't play it, but this is definitely a logical move. Maybe he didn't like that he has to give up this pawn, but it's not a pawn blunder, it's this, and then a2 is hanging. So what could happen after that? So this, rook f6, knight a2, this, and it seems that black is completely winning here. It's extremely difficult to stop this pawn. Let's say knight a1, rook goes there, and that's it. Okay, fine. Yeah, so bishop c6. Maybe he just didn't calculate the line properly, but he played bishop c8 move to keep the e6 under the control over the bishop. D takes e5, knight takes e5. So now there is an extra pawn on the flank, and this pawn majority can be converted. Bishop f1 attacking here. Knight a3 creating a fork and protecting on c4 simultaneously. Instead of this move, knight d3 was good enough, and probably this is what I would play. So knight d4, and in this position, I want you to suggest the move. So the king is exposed. You mean this can be the attack? Yes, but just one king move, and the king is safe again. Okay, Brian suggests rook d4. So I'm against unsound sacrifices. So if you play rook takes d4, that should be a well-calculated line. Probably Brian has in mind the idea of doing this and then forking, but then you have the other knight hanging. So rook d4, definitely not. Come on, guys, any suggestions? b5 first. Okay, yeah, b5 first. Yeah, it's 96 fork. f5. Well, f5 could make sense, and probably I would play such a move if there was no better move. The move that was played in the game was actually knight c2. It's a fork, and knight has to capture the knight. But after rook d2, you take this bishop, and what is more important, you attack the second rank. So how do they need to play, for example? Do they need to bring the rook here? Probably. In such a case, you can just double the rooks and then continue with f takes e5, maybe. That's why in the game it was knight d4 back. And now, because there is no fork, b5 finally was played. Rook goes there, rook takes the rook, bishop takes the rook, and rook h8. Now, white is a pawn down, so the position is completely losing for them. The rest of the game is not so important. That's why we can just, because we have a lot of games to analyze today, so let's just quickly go and let's see what happened in the game. E takes f6, g takes f6. Then the c3 is a weakness, so black tries to activate their king and avoid knight c6 check. The knight goes here. Bishop b7, because this is how they control the e4 square, but the knight has to stay here for a while to protect the pawn on e6. So rook g1, bishop d5. Now the knight can move wherever it wants. g4, which was a bit of inaccuracy. H takes g4, rook takes, king d6 to consolidate, and f5. f5, just e5. So white was trying to look for any chances to draw the game, maybe because of this passed pawn, but No, it's not enough. And this is where we need to make a small pause, and I'll give you a chance to think. What would you suggest for black in this position? A5 then b4 looks quite logical, but you cannot play b4. There are two attackers of the b4. Well, knight a4, well, quite possible, and after king d2. Okay, so you guys probably know that two minor pieces are always almost always better than a rook. So what is this exception where the rook is better than two minor pieces? The rook can be better than two minor pieces when it comes to the endgame and the files are open, and there is a chance to create a passed pawn and support it with the rook. So exactly this current situation, bishop f4 was played. Now they're gonna lose something. So that's why they have to take knight takes a4, king takes a4, rook h4. Check. King goes back and rook f4. f5 is almost lost. So if they move the king, which is quite logical, rook f5, there is nothing to talk about. Three pawns and the rook versus two minor pieces. Also, these are connected pawns, so it's easy to promote them. But knight d4, the last chance to try to save it. Because if black captures, they lose the rook. But even that was completely okay, because after d takes c3, bishop d1, it's a5, king e3, king c5, and these pawns are promoted, like that. And if a3, if instead a3, then still b4, take, and then this pawn is promoted, because every time the bishop goes to b1 to stop it, it's king b3, and now both pawns can be promoted. So why not e4 with the pawn when instead of bishop e4? So let's say we do e4 with the pawn. What's the point of doing it, by the way? What if they just bring the king to the center? Maybe they can try this after that. I'm not sure. Okay, so yeah, bishop f4 was quite clever. And now this, and here Adams just plays b4 to undermine the position of the knight, and then it's over. So it was knight e6, but after b takes c3, the pawn was promoted. That's it. This is how black won the game. So what I want you to remember from this game, so if you are, if you like to play d5 against Queen's Gambit, and well, if you are a d5 player, then against Catalan, it makes sense for you just to capture on c4 and then try to hold this pawn, but at the same time, pay attention to the initiative that your opponent may create. So you should play quite accurate. But if you are able to hold the pawn, it becomes quite difficult for your opponent to develop their initiative being without a pawn. At least you may remember this strategy. The second game we are going to observe today is the game played between John Timon and Gary Kasparov. This time it was Trompowsky variation. So if you are knight f6 player and you see Trompowsky against you, of course you can play knight e4, which looks logical. So for example, they retreat, then you have d5, you also have c5, and after d5 you may continue with queen b6. adding some pressure. It seems to me the best option is just to escape with the bishop back in order to protect. And then after e6, f3, knight f6, e4, you take, and this is a specific version of Benoni. The bishop comes to d6. The f3 is a completely useless move. So this is one of the options. But Gary just played d5. Bishop f6, e takes f6, e3. Bishop d6, he just develops his pieces. And finally, c4 was played. And this is where you guys, especially if you don't know this opening, you have to so this is where you have to take a very responsible decision. What do you think? Pawn to c6. Yeah, so c6 is definitely one of the possibilities. What else? Bishop e6 looks safe. Okay, I don't agree with you about bishop e6. So they take, you take, and they play knight e6. Then what? Do you give up this bishop? Well, you can go to c6, but it still doesn't look favorable. So how can they play? d5, yes, they can play d5, actually. So bishop e6 is not a good idea. So defending the pawn like that makes your bishop passive. And also after c takes d5 makes your bishop the object of the attack. So what else? Okay, pawn to c6. What's wrong with pawn to c6 move? They take, and then this pawn becomes a weakness. They can attack it, and you can hardly find how to defend it. You can play this move, but it is a weakness, and you have always to keep it in mind, and you have to, maybe it limits your counterplay. So that's why it makes sense to take. We do activate the enemy bishop, but at least we don't have a weakness. Yeah, thank you. So Vadim suggested this move. Well, as for bishop before, I'm not sure. So bishop to c4. Well, white now has a good pawn structure. They activated their bishop, but black has a bishop pair. That's why the position is evaluated as approximately equal. Knight f3, castle knight f3, knight d7, knight c3, and now what? Well, looks like white develops his pieces logically, after which they probably continue trying to get the central control, so we should definitely do something with it. You may suggest this move, but the point is that they can play d5 and try to do knight e4 or knight b5 and use the d pawn as a passed pawn, which is a bit annoying. So what do you think? How to play instead? So knight b6, this is what most people would play here, knight b6. So let's say bishop b3. How does it help? Do you still want to undermine with this move? I don't think it works. So they play this, probably. Or maybe they just play d5. c4, bishop c2, but they get this very important spot for their knight. So here, in order to prevent their central control, it makes sense to play, well, a6. Well, a6 this time a4, because b4 is weakened, but there is no knight to occupy such a square, so there is no way to play knight c6, knight b4. So f5, it prevents e4, so we can use the f pawn. It restricts the bishop, but it's not a big problem. So knight f6, the knight goes here, so controlling these two squares. a3, and finally c6 was played. So looks like black successfully developed their pieces. They just need to do something with this guy, but not now, because right now I don't see a good spot to develop this bishop. So neither d7 nor a6 is a good option. Bishop d7 can be played, but in order to coordinate two rooks. So rook c1, queen e7, rook goes to e1, and g6 as a prophylaxis. So then both players start maneuvering their pieces, slowly trying to look for a reasonable plan. So all this stuff that they are doing is called prophylaxis. Here, rook a8, for example, to play a5 at some point and add pressure on a3 and b4. Knight d2, rook f8. Knight goes there with the idea of knight c5, but b6, bishop f1, h5, h4. And what do you think you should be doing in this position? So Gary made a mistake here, but it's a mistake according to the engine. From a practical point of view, his move is quite logical. So yeah, it's a good question actually. Who is going to be the winner of the candidate tournament? In my opinion, I actually think that Fabiano Caruana has some chances, but not sure. This time I don't know, but I think yes, Fabiano Caruana. Okay, let's go back to the position. What would you suggest? So just f5. Just f5 means what? f4 in this position or what? F4 earlier. F5. Okay, that was the previous comment. Okay, I see. So 94 is a very logical move, and I think that such a move could be played by tons of club players. It's definitely logical. So this is and this is not a mistake. So for example, the game would continue with this. Then probably you may just keep the knight as it is, or you may analyze this sacrifice, which in my opinion is a good idea because you take all three pawns and then e3 is a weakness. So you are likely to get a full compensation. Knight f3, and then you can play a5 to do some attack here. Well, but there is no need to sacrifice on g3 if you are not sure. What else you can do? You can play a5, which in my opinion is the best way. So white needs to open the position because they have a bishop pair. And a5 does make sense because it creates a weakness on a3. For example, b takes a5, b takes a5, then a4, and we got this square. So we are even okay to sacrifice the pawn, but once we play this move, the pawn will be protected. So if they take, we have rook b1. Well, is rook b1 the best move? Yes, it's the best move. Rook b1 and bishop g3. Then we take on e3. They cannot use their queen in order to defend because the knight on c3 is hanging. So king h1, and then we keep checking them. Take on g3, take on h4 too, and with knight g4, queen h4, queen h2, it's likely to be a checkmate. Also, we have this idea and this idea. So here black is winning. That's why the pawn is poisoned. But Gary didn't play this move, which was actually quite logical because it only underlines that there is a weakness on e3 in this position. He plays f4. He was more focused on the king side. What now? Well, if e takes f4, it's queen e1. And this is definitely a better position for black because they have some initiative. This extra pawn doesn't count. This is a weakness, and the position becomes more open. So a5, then this move, bishop f5. So it looks really good. What then? If g takes f4, well, just knight g4, and this is lost. And if f3, it's even knight e3. So that's why here John Timon played e4, which was actually a mistake. F takes g3, then e5 was played. How would you continue in this position? There is a fork, and one of your pieces can be taken with a check, or instead you have some attack on f2, but if you take, then queen takes f2, and the queen joins the defense. So what do you think? Knight to g4. Yeah, so this is what Gary played, and this is actually a mistake. Knight to g4 is a mistake, and with this move he lost a lot of his advantage. So the game continued with f takes g3, bishop retreats, bishop d3, rook ac8, and if in this position Michael Adams would play rook a2, I think he was able to defend this position for some time and maybe not lose the game. But instead of knight g4, what else you can suggest? So instead of knight g4, what else can we do? Pawn takes f2. Pawn takes f2, I think, is a better move. Pawn takes f2, queen takes f2. And then knight g4. So now if this, just queen d6, queen g2, and some initiative after bishop f5. Because we're attacking the rook, so the rook goes there, queen f4. This is the object of the attack. Knight e3 is coming, so it's a bit risky. So g takes f2 is possible, but there was a much better move. It was bishop f5. Now what? If this, it's queen f6, and we are threatening with a discovered attack. For example, if bishop d3, then just bishop takes bishop, and then we take on f2 with a checkmate. That's why bishop d3 right away. Now bishop takes bishop, queen takes, we take here, king takes knight g4, then we take on h4 and win the game quickly. So let's say king g3 to not let us do this, but then just f6, and if they take our bishop, what else they can do? Otherwise we take here and we are completely winning. So they take our bishop, it's queen d6, queen f3, and after queen h2 it's time to resign. There is a threat of gaining the queen, there is a threat of delivering a mate, it's just over. So this is what Garry Kasparov missed. He played knight g4, f takes g3, bishop retreats, bishop d3, rook ac8, and this is where he played queen d2, which was another inaccuracy. Bishop e6, queen e2, and that's all. This is where we're gonna stop the game because the position becomes completely winning. They both, after that, made tons of mistakes because the position is a bit complicated. But Garry still managed to win because his position was always better. Sometimes he was completely winning. Sometimes it was just a slightly better position with good chances for white to draw the game. But white didn't use these chances. So just the last question. How would you play in this position? While you're thinking, guys, I would like to let you know that not next week, but in 2 weeks, there will be a masterclass by FIDE master Pavel Martynov. He is going to um, explain on this webinar how to play with black pieces in order to obtain initiative and play for a win starting from the first moves, even with black pieces. So I think this is a very important opening for those of you who struggle with his opening repertoire playing with black pieces. So bishop d5 is a suggestion, but bishop d5 they're gonna take. Pawn takes. What did you achieve? Your bishop is still blocked. So Brian suggests bishop b3. Okay, interesting. Bishop b3, and if bishop b3, and if rook takes b3.
F6. I think that's F6.
Well, f6, pawn takes f6, check. Queen takes f6.
Queen takes F6. We lose a rook. Where's that?
No, there is no rook loss. So pawn takes, queen takes f6, then knight e4. So it's a bit unclear. But actually, I don't want to take on e6. I'll on f6, I mean, I'll play it something like that to add some pressure on c2. And after that, it doesn't look so good. Instead, you can play a very simple move in this position. Okay, this move is actually queen to d7. How does he protect d4? And once d4 is taken, then e5 is lost. And after that, it's 2 extra pawns for black, which means completely winning, especially if we summarize it with the attack on the, if we sum it with the attack on the king side for black. Well, the only way to protect this pawn, according to what I see, is queen e4. But queen e4 fails because of what? With rook takes d5, f5. Well, f5, maybe queen f4. Oh, just bishop takes e5. Bishop takes e5, d4 is hanging, so take, after which it's rook e5, and then the rook behind is lost. Maybe not only the rook, but something else. Maybe even this bishop, because where the queen goes to c4. Check, king here. Well, it's a completely losing position. White is already down the exchange. Well, knight e3, fork, and that's it. So okay, so this is how Garry Kasparov could win the game. So what I want you to remember from this game is his way of playing against Trompowsky variation. So let's go back. Instead of doing knight e4, which is the most logical reaction here, he played d5, letting white to initiate their main idea, which actually is a kind of a trap. And then he took on c4 to not create a weakness here. The rest is just to build a solid position, prevent white from any counterplay with f5, and then try to open the position with some breakout. He chose f4, but instead he could just play slowly with a5 on the other side of the board, and this is how he would activate his bishops anyway. But f4 allows him to succeed with the attack. Okay, so there is a question from Brian. Did knight f6 work? At which moment?
And the last move that we looked at, instead of bishop takes e5.
No, it didn't work. So wait a second. No, this rook b3, queen d7, queen e4, knight f6, I think doesn't look so good. What if they take? Because if you take, I can bring the queen back and deliver a check one more time. So you have to probably move to h7. And then it seems to work because the rook is lost anyway, but I don't know, maybe there is a compensation. No, there is no compensation, of course. What if they do not take but retreat with their queen to f4 right away? then I don't see how you can continue. You can do knight d5, but we just exchange there. So it looks like knight f6 is not the best way. Bishop e5 wins the game immediately. Moreover, with knight g4, you control the king, and it can go to g2 only. Okay, then we have two more examples, and these two more examples are devoted to London system. Well, I don't know if you guys have my course on Chessable, but let me just start with what I suggest we should play against London. So I'm a d5 player, so I would play d5 in this position. The black player, who was actually Wesley So, he was playing against Jeffrey Xiong. So he played knight f6, knight f3, and then he played d5, bishop f4, and he played exactly the line that I suggest with c5. e3, knight c6. Now c3, this is the most popular line. Queen b6. This is what I often play here in Argentina because people like to play London system because London doesn't require much knowledge, just some knowledge of the opening. And that's why this position happens very often. Queen b3, but after c4, they are in a bit of a trouble because if they take, then I have a plan of doing this. Some of you may be afraid of knight e3, knight b5, knight c7, but it's not a problem at all. I just don't need to blunder a rook, so rook a5 attacking this guy. If a4, I at some variations have bishop c2 in mind. Well, knight c7 this time is just a useless check, so I don't see the point of playing it. That's why what they have to retreat or they have to do this. And if let's say I play e6 in this position, what they can do this, I can do that, protecting, and I still want to win this pawn on a4. After which I also trap the knight, and king d7 is coming, of course, to chase the bishop away and to control the d6. Okay, fine. So that's why taking on b6 is not considered to be a good continuation for white. That's why only, according to what I see, only 30% of players take. All others move their queen to c2. But once the queen goes to c2, here you have another tactical idea which helps you to develop pieces. What do you think? Which move black has to play in this position? So g6. No, well, fianchetto on the king side. No, guys. There is a huge difference. There is a huge difference. So, for example, if they play queen c2 in this position, then g6 and fianchetto on the king side. But when there is a queen b3 and after c4 the queen goes back, you can play better. You can play bishop f5 right away. And if they take on e5, you take on b2 and win a rook. So same thing works with, well, yeah, so queen d2 falls under knight e4. So here they have to retreat to c1. And look at how better black are developed already. By the way, I have a question for you. What if they play queen c2 in this position, defending here? What's wrong with bishop f5 in this case? Who can tell me? I'll mark it as a mistake. So what's wrong with this? Yeah, so Georgios is absolutely correct. But let's wait, maybe someone else suggests anything here. Well, no, Queen f5, it's the same, Queen b2. Queen f5 is not a good idea. Bishop d3, but then bishop takes d3, and it's still Queen b2. e4, well, e4, bishop e4, and it looks like you lose a pawn for free. Okay, so only Georgios is correct here. The best move is d takes c5. So when the pawn is on c4, it's fine to play bishop to f5. But here it's not, because what? Now what? If the queen takes, then this queen no longer attacks on b2, and we just lost a bishop. If now we take their queen, they take our queen. And without pawn on c4, this position looks a bit awkward. We don't have this plan. They can do this always. They can. They have d4. They have a5 to add pressure, and they can also develop knight a3, knight b5 with a temper. So here doesn't look so well when as it works when there are pawns on d4 and c4. So the black pawn on d4, the white pawn on d4, or the black pawn on c4, the white pawn on d4. So that's why here it doesn't work. It only works in this position after queen b3, c4, and queen c2. This is where it works perfectly well. So let me... this is what... this is what I explain in my course that was recently published on, well, not recently, I think it's a year ago. It was published on Chessable. So, and I think that, well, according to their evaluation, it's actually the best course. All players marked it as, all students marked it as 5 rating with 5 stars. So all these can be learned in this course. Yeah, let me actually show you what I have here. So it contains of 12 chapters and model games. So all possible variations are explained. So if you need a solid opening repertoire against London system and you like playing d5 positions, this is definitely a very good choice. So what is shown here is actually played by me, myself, against people of any level. Okay, fine. Oh, maybe I can give you the link, just a sec. So yeah, I'll send the link here in the chat. So if you are interested, you can take a look. And if you have any questions, you can also send them to me by email. So let's continue. Let's continue with the game. So bishop f5, queen goes to c1. e6, knight bd2, rook c8. Rook c8 maybe is not the most important move in this position. I would instead suggest to focus on bishop e7, but maybe black decided to play this move because they didn't want white to undermine, because this is how... I'll just show you. b3, c takes b3, then a takes or knight takes. It's just knight b4 with a pressure here, and on c2, d3, and the position is losing actually for white already. h3, bishop e7 now, bishop e2, castle, castle, and what black should be doing here is this. Very often they move the queen back and then start the attack b5, b4, because they have extra space. Here I would first suggest playing h6 to secure our bishop's position. But black continued with queen a5, and well, because they were expecting probably white to play b3, and b3 is actually a mistake. So what's wrong with this move? How do we punish our opponent? And to be honest, it's hard to suggest any reasonable plan for white in this position. They develop their pieces somehow, but how do they coordinate? When there is a pawn on c4, they should be trying to do e4, which now is completely impossible. Their queen isn't well placed, and the only activity that they can find is on the queen side. So that's why they played this mistake. It's not just a blunder because they miscalculated. It's a blunder because it is a logical move with the queen on c1, but due to how black activated their pieces, it was even a strategic blunder. So what's wrong with it, with b3? How do we punish our opponent for that? Okay, so those who would like to watch the recording, please message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. So if you want to see the recording of this event, you can message me there. Yeah, guys, so you are correct. It's bishop a3. And after the queen moves, the rook is trapped. So we are not only going to capture the rook, but the c3 pawn too. So b takes c4, the rook is still trapped. So that's why queen takes c3. Rook b1, bishop takes. Queen takes, and then just queen b4. Maybe it wasn't the best way to play, but black simply captured the exchange with no compensation. And the rest of the game is not so interesting for us anymore. I just wanted you to explain how with the opening that I play myself and what I suggest to my students, you can successfully defeat your opponent, even if he plays logical plans. So that was a queen exchange offer. So bishop d2, it's because it's hard to move the bishop away. D takes c4, knight takes c4, rook fd8 to control this because it was bishop d6 coming. Rook b1, queen goes back. And black is already -2, so it's completely winning. So taking on b7 doesn't work because after the exchange, it's knight takes f4, it takes f4, and then the d4 pawn is hanging. That's why bishop g3. But then after this move, you can initiate a tactical strike and solve the problem with the weakness on b7. So which move would you suggest? Okay, so while you are thinking about this position, let me quickly go to this moment where bishop a3 was played. I think there was a question, what happens if b4? Well, what happens? Bishop takes c1. Actually, maybe, yeah, bishop takes here, pawn takes, then this move. Where does the rook move? To d1, probably. Then I think we should take this pawn. This is lost anyway. And then the c pawn becomes a pass pawn, so it's even more winning than it was in the game. So we are here. Knight cb4, nice move. Definitely possible move. Yeah, right. You threatened the bishop, so yeah, but there was a better move played. Queen before exchanging the queens. Oh, well, no, well, once the queens are exchanged, you lose the control over the d6 square. So maybe there can be some invasion, which is a bit unfavorable because it's hard to find a good spot for the rook. It has to go to a8. Pawn to b6. Come on, guys. It's pawn to b5. And if queen b5, it's just knight c3. So it's a poison pawn. Knight goes to a3. And then just a6. It's not a weakness anymore. It has to be undermined with a4. But in order to perform a4, white has to spend several tempi. Knight c2, knight a5, the knight comes there. So this, knight c3, the rook moves, and knight a4. Well, the rest is not important. There were some exchanges. Now there is an extra pawn even for black. White is looking for some counter chances based on the attack, but there is no point of doing it. Even now the bishop is blocked. Okay, the rest is not important. Let's stop here. It's a completely winning game. What you may learn is the idea of bishop f5 in this position. And after queen c1, they usually have an idea of doing b3 or something like that. So keep it in mind. That's why actually Wesley So played rook c8 and then queen a5 to prevent b3. However, if white plays something else, he still has in mind the idea of doing this. Maybe b5, a3, queen goes back, and then a5, b4 anyway, as the most common plan. Fine. So the last game that I would like to demonstrate today was played by Anton Korobov with black pieces here. And it was a possible way of how to play against London system. So if for some reason you don't like d5, which I recommend to everyone actually, you can play c5. How do people react in this position? Well, the main move is e3. You can also consider d5. d5 leads to Benoni positions. But this time it's a better version of Benoni because b5 can be played immediately. Then queen b6, bishop b7. This is a weakness. So if e4 sacrificing this pawn, because it's a sacrifice, there is no way to capture on b5 because of this check, and after knight c3, it's knight takes knight, the bishop is hanging. So take queen f3, check, knight d2, let's exchange them. Queen goes to b6, and where is the white's compensation for the pawn? So that's why after c5, most people play e3. How would you play in this position? What do you think? There was a very nice move by black. Okay, Shalika suggests 94. What's the purpose? Vadim suggests queen b6, which is actually quite common. But the point is that after queen b6, they have a very nice idea. They can play knight c3 or they can play knight a3. So knight c3 and the pawn becomes, well, poisoned. So for example, if queen takes b2, it's knight b5. Well, then you can still play knight d5 and so on with approximately equal position. This is a playable plan. Another option is this. And if queen b2, it's basically the same thing. Instead of this move, you have knight to d5. Attacks the bishop. Now what? What they can do? Let's decide. So if they do this move, rook takes, then, well, I don't think it does make sense for us to analyze d takes c5 because you can simply gain the pawn back. And what did white achieve? They just gave up a bishop pair, but they can try to hold the central control with e4, knight c7, knight f3, but then just d5. And looks like the center is exchanged and there is no advantage for white anymore. Maybe d5 in this position, but then how would we play in this position? Maybe just fianchetto or d6. So again, it's a better version of Benoni because there is no dark squared bishop. So bishop g3. Well, d takes c5 is another playable move, but then I don't think it looks good. White is better developed, but do they actually have enough benefits to try to play for a win? So bishop g3, queen b6 this time. Well, knight e3 is a playable move, and then, as I said, queen b2, knight b5, queen b4, then c3. You cannot take it, because if you do, then it's queen d2, and you are pinned, and knight c7 is coming to... Wait. Knight c7 first, king d8, and then queen d2. Yes, this is correct. So that's why queen a5, bishop c4, and you have to play a6. Well, yeah, queen b2 is a poison pawn trap, but it's fine. You can take it. At least you get approximately equal position here. c3 is vulnerable, so knight e2, e6, bishop f3, and b4. So, well, you can also do d6 just. So white is better developed, but they're pawned down, so it's definitely the position that you can play for a win with black pieces. According to the engine, it's equal. Oh, let me turn the engine on and I'll tell you exactly. So it's d6, it's minus 0.9. And if you play b4, it's zeros. So probably d6, then castle, and something like that. So it's fine to capture on b2. But in the game, it was knight c3, which looks more logical. Because now capturing on b2 no longer makes any sense. You have a knight hanging, but knight takes c3, b takes c3, and just e6. So, well, the white position was a bit compromised because of the double pawns. There will be some attack here, and black play flexibly. Knight f3 and queen e5 is interesting, but queen e5, queen d2. That's why instead of that, black plays which move? Oh, just let's go back. So if instead it was rook b1 after queen e5, two pawns are hanging simultaneously. So that's why knight f3. Now, what would you play with black? Well, knight c6 is the most logical move here. Okay, yeah, it's queen b2. Attacking the pawn. And in order to save it, king d2 has to be played. So while their king is already on d2, it lost his castling privilege, and you can just keep developing your pieces. Knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, f6, bishop goes back, and here probably it could make sense to take, because c takes d4 faces with bishop b4, and then white is in trouble. So they would have to take with the e-pawn, and then g6, you can bring your bishop to the attack. That would be the best way to play. Well, it doesn't mean white loses the game. They can play f4, but don't you think that this position is favorable for black? They just need to retreat with their queen, castle, and then think of how they develop their bishop. This g5, f takes g5, bishop takes g5, or just pawn takes. Anyway, it should be fine. This bishop can be developed on the other side with bishop d7, or maybe e5 will be played at a certain moment of the game. Okay, fine. So bishop e7, a4, trying to trap the queen. The queen has to retreat. Why the queen has to retreat? So, for example, if you castle, bishop b5, a6, queen f3, and even if you take, you get your queen trapped. That's why queen b6. Now queen h5 check, g6, queen h6 to prevent you from castling, but your king is definitely safer than the white one. Bishop d3, queen d8. White starts the attack with h4. So this is what you also need to be familiar with. But bishop f8, queen goes back, d5, and you just develop your pieces. So here, white has to combine the ideas on both flanks. If they play h5 right away, it's g5 just. And then bishop d6 maybe. If that's why a5 was played in order to restrict the queen and maybe also play e6. But c4, bishop e2, bishop d7. So here, after h5 was finally played and the position becomes approximately equal, g5, queen f3, h6. Then bishop c6 trying to activate. Well, if they play this move, then black is better after f5. This is a weakness. Something like this is coming too. So e takes d5 and bishop takes d5. Of course, the bishop, because we need to activate this bishop. Queen e3, queen d7. So this is a weakness that we're gonna attack. And move by move, successfully, black tried to outplay white after that. So bishop g7. Let me just show you the moves. King tries to escape. So you see how many moves they spend in order to move their king to the safe position. Then queen c6, rook b4. And black starts the attack with this move. It, of course, allows white to play this, but then take. And if queen takes, it's bishop takes f3. So that's why pawn takes. Bishop takes f3 anyway. G takes f3, and let's double the rooks. a6 first, then queen d5 with the idea of entering the enemy camp. So king g2, because it's a pin, let's play g4. And this is where they started making mistakes. For example, after queen e3, what do you think is the best move for black?
Well, it would be a winning endgame, so we could trade the queens here.
Why do you think it's a winning game? There is a weakness on b on b7.
Because of the two files with doubled pawns.
Well, it's not a guarantee. Let's talk about it. So how exactly would you play in order to win?
Rook, hold on. Rook d5 in this position.
Rook d5. Okay, yeah, interesting. So what if they what they can do? Take on f3 or take on b7? What is, but let's say they do this.
Okay. Probably take the
e5.
e pawn, yeah.
So this, you take this. They get the second rook.
Back to
So
e5. Yeah.
back to e5? Or what?
Yeah. Yeah,
What
looks
for?
okay.
What for?
Oh, okay. I guess that drops that. That's not good.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a winning position actually. If you play like that, but it's not so obvious. So g takes f3 is a logical move if you assume them to take, because after rook g8 you force the king to move away. But what if they just move the king to h1 or to h2? For example, this rook g8, queen h6, and now while black is not winning, their own king has some difficulties. So the best move was actually rook g8 with the idea of taking and then activating the rook right away. So for example, well, queen h6 I think shouldn't be analyzed here, because if queen h6 happens, it's just queen f3. and the king is forced to go back, and after g3 there is nothing to talk about, because if you deliver a check, then this, and the queen is hanging, and the move, the checkmate will be delivered on the next move. So rook b6 instead, then rook g5, and you are about to take here and play rook h5 move. That is quite clever. So rook d6, this, queen a5. And this is a 100% winning position. Okay, so rook g8 was the best option. Instead, in the game, it was g takes f3, and white reacted with king h2. Rook g8 anyway. And white made a mistake. They played this move. Now, take, and activate the other rook to g7, after which the position is completely losing. So queen takes a5, threatening with a back rank mate. King e1, and rook g4, trying to attack from e4. So queen d6, rook e4 check, king goes there. And then what would you suggest, guys? What is the simplest way? Rook e2? Rook e2, king c1 then.
Yeah.
And if you play queen e1, they block with rook on b1. So yeah, so rook e2 is of course logical, but king c1, queen checks. Wait. There is a better check, I think. Ah, yeah, there is a check here. No, but then rook b2. Okay, so let me show you what I wanted. Check, then this, then check here. So the king goes there. And then let's say queen b2, threatening with a mate in one, but it seems to me that white has a perpetual check. Actually, white has a simple perpetual check with queen d8. Because the king cannot leave to the 6th rank. We just need to repeat with queen d7, queen d8. So the simplest way to win here was queen d5. And this is how the queens are exchanged. So take, this is lost. So rook b7, for example, rook takes d5. And it's a losing position. Well, if you can try to gain one of the pawns, but then I have rook e2 and take on f2, and this pawn becomes, the f3 pawn becomes dangerous. So in the game after queen d5, it was king c1 played, but it's still a losing position. Rook a1, king b2, and just queen d6 because the pawn on d6 is lost. You can play this move, but you lose here or there. But if you play b5 first, then nothing can stop you from taking the pawn, and the rook is just locked. They have to spend a few tempi to activate it. This is where the game finished. It's a completely winning game. After rook d1, rook takes d6, or rook takes d7. So what do you, yeah, let's sum it up. What did we learn? So first of all, when it's Catalan played against you, it makes sense for you to capture the pawn on c4 and hold it. When it's Trompowsky, you may let your opponent to go through the main line where they take on f6. Why not? Just then try to prevent their counterplay and consolidate your position. Against London, I have two solutions. One, the most simple and the most solid one, with good chances to play for a win. And the other one is a bit riskier, but still playable. It's c5 and knight d5 after that. So, well, this one you may just learn 3-4 lines and be okay, because people are unlikely to know people unlikely know how to play against knight d5 because this is a rare variation. But if you want to play on a high level, then the line that was demonstrated in the game between Jeffrey Sayong and Wesley So is definitely much better and provides you with a very solid position. So according to the statistics, here Black wins 33% of all games. 21% of the games are won by white, and 46% of the games ended in a draw. So here, if you play solidly, if you understand what you are doing, you are more likely to succeed. And if you want to learn more about the what I play and about this strategy against London system, you can definitely watch my course on Chessable. Okay, guys, so we are done for today. Do you have any questions?
What was the name of the opening black played in the first thing you showed where white played the Catalan?
Well, there was no specific opening. It was just Catalan opening.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know.
Well, it Lichess identifies it as open defense, and by that meaning, open means d takes c4 is played.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, fine, guys. So thank you for attending our webinar. I hope to see everyone next Sunday. There will be a webinar too. There will be no webinar in 2 weeks. I do not want to conduct the webinar at the same time when FIDE Master Pavel Martynov conducts a masterclass on chess lance. So then we are likely to skip a webinar in 2 weeks, but there definitely will be a webinar next week. You can register or you can just use the same Zoom link. See you next week and thank you for coming.